Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Identity Insights by Indicio. I'm your host, Tim Spring, and today I'm joined by Mike Ebert, a Director of Engineering at Indicio, and Trevor Butterworth, who is the VP of Communications and Governance. We're all here to discuss the recent DTC Type 2 solution that Indicio has created and is now offering. So I really appreciate both of you taking the time to speak with me today. For those of you unfamiliar, let's start off with a quick, explanation of what exactly a DTC is. Would one of you be able to break that down for us real quick?
Sure. So DTC stands for Digital Travel Credential, and this is a specification that comes out of the International Civil Aviation Organization, which is the UN body that essentially created the standards for passports so governments can trust and accept travelers from different jurisdictions. And the DTC aims to say, well, how can we render what we know as physical passports in digital form, and they have the same, assurance, the same degree of trust that will enable people to cross the border using them. And so there are different specifications. So there are three different specifications. The DTC, surprise, surprise, they're called DTC Type 1 or DTC 1, 2, and 3. And a DTC 1 is where a traveler is able to take advantage of another change that ICAO mandated, about 10, 15 years ago, which was that passports be machine readable, right? So that you're able to read they have an electronic component, and in fact, many of them have a chip which contains the passport details. So in this, with a DTC 1 specification that governs how a person can take their passport with a chip and turn that into a digital travel credential. There's a little bit more to it than that. DTC 2 is the government issues the passport and a corresponding digital travel credential. And then DTC 3, which is a bit further down the road, is a world where we purely use digital travel credentials for travel and other forms of super high, identity assurance.
Sounds good. So could one of you offer, like, what is the big deal with DTC Type 2, right? If they could already get a version of their passport in the credential format from their passport, why does it matter so much that now governments can issue it directly?
So a type one talks about how you rely on the physical passport and its chip as the ultimate source of truth. The process of deriving or reading and encoding the data from the passport chip into a verifiable credential or a format you can share digitally, that doesn't specify who has to do it. Anybody can do it as long as they follow the proper procedure, then and you have the physical passport as a backup, then that's adequate. With DTC Type 2, you change who is handling the digital version of the data, and it's the same issuing body or authority as gave you the physical passport. So instead of having a physical passport plus anyone, any company or organization handling the digital data, it's the physical passport, and the issuer of the passport is also handling the digital procedure. And so that's the biggest change. It also includes the specifications for what kind of physical component, so whether that be like a smart card or a phone, a smartphone that includes the right capabilities for storing and securing and making the virtual or digital part of it usable. So mostly the who issues it, but then also the standards for how to handle the device that holds the data.
I think it's worth adding that yeah, we at Indicia were the first to create and implement a DTC 1. And I think it's worth explaining how the mechanism by which that was created. And for that, I think I'll leave it, put it to the guy who designed it, Mike.
Yeah, I got to participate in coming up with a solution for that. Um, the specification existed for a long time, but the procedure of making it usable was pretty tricky. Like the specification didn't include information about you take the DTC data off the chip, but and you encode it in the DTC format, but how do you make it so that that remains trustworthy and secure and easily usable? So when we worked with our partners at CETA, the idea was to take the DTC after you've derived it from your passport and let's store it in a verifiable credential. If you put it in a verifiable credential, we started with a non-creds because they have good privacy preservation, and it was um, a production ready solution that was several years ahead of some of the other solutions that are coming to the market now more commonly. But that was what we chose at the beginning, and we said, all right, let's store this virtual component in a verifiable credential. We have the software, we have the wallet, we have the protocols for being able to handle that verifiable credential and to be able to pass that DTC data from one party to another in a way that was verifiable and trustworthy. So that was, and we did that project with CETA and Aruba, and the pilot was a great success. It was usable, it was reliable, and we were the first to run a pilot and use that technology in that way.
And of course, the great benefit to governments, particularly in this case, the government of Aruba, which is a tourism-based economy, is that they could know in advance who was, trying to, they could know in advance and authorize who could arrive in the country. And as a result, border crossing could be sped up 4 times by using the seamless nature of verifying a digital a credential with an authenticated biometric. So this was a kind of a this is it's not just a benefit to the traveler who, of course, I literally went from the airport in Aruba to the beach in under 30 minutes, which was part of one of the trials. It simplifies everything, and it has this. It's like a super identity. By authenticating the passport document, by authenticating, authenticating and binding the person's biometrics to that and their device, you have what we call government grade digital identity. So now it makes sense for governments to issue government grade digital identity. And I think that's what we're going to see with the DTC too. It's a revolution in efficiency.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, that pre-approval speeding up security is definitely a big deal. At the beginning of your last answer, you mentioned right, Indicio was the first to make the DTC Type 1 work in the real world. With this new DTC Type 2 that, is now available and proven, do you know if anyone else is out there doing that, or what do you know what's going
There's
on
a
with that?
very small trial as part of the European Union. Well, it sounds contradictory, large-scale pilot projects, but they've been trialing a DTC2 in a very small way. But the sort of the big step up for the European Union, and one that we're involved in, is the aptitude trial, which is which in which a lot of business use cases for the European digital wallet and verifiable credentials are going to be tested and piloted over 2 years. And one of the big components of that is a DTC2 to be issued by governments, the governments in question being France and Holland. And we're going to be working on that with our partner CETA. So very excited about that. But we've kind of jumped the gun a little bit by actually releasing this technology already. We've been pushing the development of authenticated biometrics, digital travel credential aligned passport credentials, and why wait? Why wait? Let's put them into play. And I think we're going to see countries start using this before the end of the year.
Yeah, it's sometimes you get to work on a cool project and you're not allowed to disclose the details.
Yeah.
We've been working on one like that where a nation will be uh, likely will be issuing DTC Type 2s before the end of the year. And it's interesting that there's so much demand for this. The ICAO hasn't even finished the part of the DTC Type 2 or 3 specifications that relate to the physical component. The virtual component is the same for all three types, and then they're working on the specs for the physical components. For the Aptitude Consortium large scale pilot in Europe, and then the other project I've hinted to and can't disclose, the nations in question said, well, we're going to pick some hardware and we're going to give this a try, and we'll adjust the hardware requirement, when the ICAO spec is finalized, but let's get going. Let's, as a nation, let's issue these and use them, and maybe our experience can inform the ICAO bodies that are working on that spec to say what works and what doesn't. So there's lots of appetite for it. Everybody's moving even before the spec is fully done. And like Trevor said, there's the pilot and at least one project where it's likely to make it before the end of the year in production.
And I think there's a bit, there's a wider context here, which is that air travel is expected to double by 2040, right? That's going from, I think 4 billion passengers in 2023 to 8 billion by 2040. That's a lot of extra flights and a lot of extra passengers to go through a lot of fixed infrastructure at airports. We've already got, people do not love the airport experience of lines, particularly at borders. This tech, this technology is essential to capacity building in international travel, but it's also essential to deal with, lots of other issues throughout what's called the travel ribbon. So when you have this, this high assurance digital identity, you can use that to create all sorts of seamless processes where data once had to be manually checked. You can ingest data from the credential where once you had to write it out and there was errors and then people were delayed and then there was mix-ups and all sorts of chaos. And when you're dealing with really high throughput of travelers, every extra minute of delay has a knock-on effect. So this is sort of essential digital infrastructure to make travel work better and be more streamlined and more secure. So you also have the issues of biometric fraud and AI generative fraud and all sorts of threats like this. But now everybody, not when they present for a liveness check, they have a backup proof that they are who they really are. They have an authenticated proof, biometric, that can be automatically compared with their liveness check. And that's a brilliant way to meet the problem of deep fakes and other sorts of biometric fraud. So this technology, both in airports and outside, has so much application, and it's part of, and it meets all the sort of consumer, this we've now got to, when I'm of the generation, that saw the Commodore 64K computer in high school. Right. People younger than me have lived their entire lives through their mobile phones, for good or bad. They expect seamless experiences. And that's what this technology enables, as well as giving all these back end benefits. But I have a question for you, Mike.
Hmm.
So we've proven this technology can work with the one credential format that you mentioned, a non-creds. The European Union has STJWTs, right? Or SDJOTs as it's called. Can we do digital travel credentials, the same kind of digital travel credentials with SDJOTs?
So there are at least four major credential formats that have seen adoption in the world. Anon-creds were some of the very first to be production ready. You already mentioned SD-JOT VCs. And then another long-time format would be the JSON-LD or W3C VCs, where various flavors of JSON-LD were met that format. And then in addition to those, there's the MDoc format that's a general purpose format for credentials, and the MDL specification that's a subset of that for driver's licenses. MDoc is also a very popular credential format. What's interesting is that the approach for a DTC is a series of fields in a particular encoding that exists independent of any of those formats. And the ability to put the encoded DTC into one of those formats and then the other attributes. So instead of just one large encoded blob, you can also have the individual attributes stored separately. And you store those attributes in those credential formats. You can put a DTC in any one of those. And so, which one would become the dominant or majority or only format for storing passports? I guess we'll see. But all of those, depending on how you implement them, offer things like selective disclosure, which is the most important privacy-preserving feature for a credential to only share the data you need to share. It should work with any of those four major formats. So,
Well, and aren't we seeing, of course, that with the choice of formats, countries like Canada and India have gone with anon-creds, and the European Union has gone with SD-JOTs. And of course, a mobile driver's license is probably, the one of the ways of implementing Real ID in the US. So I think the key is that they all should be able to work with each other from a single digital wallet. Is that, I would, what's the tech looking like on that?
so the European Union's architectural reference framework, their standards for their wallets, that includes SD-JOT VCs. They recently added MDoc MDL, and it includes W3 VCs. The only thing they left out were anon-creds. But when they encounter travelers from, like you mentioned, India or other nations that have implemented with anon-creds, they may have to grapple with at least verifying those credentials. So saying which one is, Apple and Google have put a lot of weight behind MDoc and MDL as a format. So seeing which one will win is really hard at this point.
Yeah.
There's different mandates in different parties.
Simplest
With
thing is to make them
Indicio,
all work with each other.
so if you only implement one of those formats and then you encounter one of the other formats, then you might be in trouble. And in
Mm.
Indicio, we've taken the approach of we know how to work with all of those formats. So we're building a wallet SDK that would support receiving, holding, and presenting any of those credential formats. We've worked on Proven to make it capable of issuing any of those formats. And then we've written verifier code or relying party code that could read any of those formats. We can assemble any one of those particular formats or some combination of the above. In particular, what we did with Aruba included SD-JOT VCs in addition to anon-creds. And
Mm.
so we're ready to go with whatever ends up winning out. We can help people bridge the gaps between the formats, between the nations, and what one has chosen versus what the other has mandated. I think we'll be ready to go, and we'll see how it all plays out.
Good
But
stuff.
it's kind of the analogy of there's a gold rush going on, and we can sell picks and shovels to everybody.
I like
Excellent.
that. So say someone is sold, obviously, right? That we've described quite a few benefits to this technology. Mike, you mentioned there is like some physical components to it as well as, the software components. How do you get started implementing the DTC Type 2?
So uh, ICAO has specifically said that smart cards already meet the bar that they want to clear for security and storage of DTC Type 2s. So you can implement today if you work with the company that prints the physical passport and encodes the data on the chip that's on that passport. They can also create the virtual component and store it on a smart card. The other thing that you could do is you could do like France and the Netherlands or the other undisclosed party in a project we can't disclose yet, and pick your own smartphone physical component, stack and say these are the physical components, the phone and whatever chips and security it supports. We're going to pick that and go with it until ICAO releases the specification that covers smartphones. So those are two ways to approach doing a DTC Type 2 right away. And Indicio can help you. We don't do the physical passport printing. We're not encoding data on the chips, but we could work with those type of parties to create the virtual component and issue it and store it on one of the physical components that we mentioned, like the smart card of the phone.
I think it's worth mentioning that, our recent announcement of a partnership with Regular enables us to do, to encode all sorts of, government issued documents and proofs of identity as verifiable credentials. So we're really expanding the capacity of what's possible with digital credentials for travel and authentication.
Absolutely. Yeah, it definitely sounds like some pretty exciting stuff. Just curious, right? Because as the DTC is now, kind of live and proven, I'm curious, and I'm not sure if we could talk about it. Are we working on DTC Type 3 at all? Could that be a little teaser information, or is that just too far down the road at this point?
Well, the virtual component of the ICAO DTC spec does not change from Type 1 to Type 2 to Type 3. So we already have experience working with that virtual component. We could do any of the types. The holdup is the specification for the physical components of DTC Type 2 and Type 3. Type 3, I imagine that governments are not likely to say we want smart cards to be the sole representation of your passport when they had physical passports before. I think that's probably DTC Type 3 is likely to be a virtual only world. And you got to wait for the specifications for the phone for storing the virtual component on a physical component. I don't know if they're going to select the same standards for the physical component for a phone between Type 2 and Type 3. It seems to make sense to me, at least as an engineer, to say if it's good enough for Type 2, can it please also be good enough for Type 3 so you don't have to do overlapping implementations and a cutover from one standard to another? Why not just say this is the standard, and if you include a physical passport, you can, but if you're gonna, as a nation, you're gonna cut that out and you feel the world is ready for digital only, then go with the same phone infrastructure and just not bother with the printed one. But so it's a little early for Type 3 still. I think the world has to get used to working with the virtual or digital versions that are part of Type 1 and Type 2. And as the world adopts and gets used to those, at some point they'll be comfortable saying, we really don't need the printed passport. We haven't actually looked at those as people have come through the border in a long time. The percentage is so low that let's just stop that for future support. So it'll
Yeah,
take a bit.
I think anything that you're dealing with, sort of government, that sort of level of government change is going to require time to get comfortable with how, DDC twos are being used. But I do think the likely use case is more that we'll see the first implementation of DTC threes for emergency use, where say somebody has lost their passport, or somebody or there's an emergency travel requirement, and I think that will be the likely first use case before a completely virtual only digital document takes over.
Right. If you're in a world where DTC Type 2 is allowed, right, where there's a physical passport that anchors everything, there's a virtual component and it's stored on a physical component. Let's say that you travel to a nation that supports DTC Type 2. You lose your physical passport. Maybe both your phone and your physical passport fall off the boat when you're out sightseeing or something. If you were to contact your embassy and say, I've got a new phone, I have, a way to prove it, we can do a phone call to a Zoom call to prove I'm a real person or something. I have other identity. I have a photocopy of my old passport or whatever. And then in that case, the nation that issued the original passport could say, all right, we're going to issue to your new phone a digital or a virtual component, and to your new physical component, there's no printed passport anymore because you lost it. But for now, since people are accepting the digital versions, there you go. There's your emergency use case, and that meets the current requirements. And we'll make an exception for the physical printed passport at the moment because it takes time to do that, and you don't have time.
Fair enough. Awesome. Well, it looks like we are coming to the end of our time for today. I really appreciate all the insights that both of you have, given on this topic. I'm curious if you have any, final thoughts or just key takeaways, if you'd like the audience to remember about this new DTC Type 2 availability.
I would basically say coming soon to a border crossing experience near you. I think it's about to hit prime time and see some real world and at scale adoption. So, we're definitely going to point out where you can use it and go take advantage of it and try it out.
Um, and it's also, so the other thing is that this isn't really difficult technology to implement. In fact, it can be rapidly implemented. This isn't a really heavy infrastructural project for any country or anybody who wants to use a authenticated biometric in a verifiable credential, and in other words, a sort of a digital passport credential. This has huge applicability with the easily scales and is just and works with pretty much all the biometric infrastructure that currently exists. So it's not one of these infrastructure projects or IT projects that keeps people awake at night. It's the end user simplicity is matched by implementation simplicity.
Definitely sounds good for IT teams everywhere, Trevor. So thank you for that. All right. Well, thank you again both for your time today. Really appreciate everything, all the comments and insights into this. If you at home are interested in learning a bit more about decentralized identity technology and verifiable credentials, please be sure to subscribe to the channel and we'll continue to bring you some more educational content. If you have any specific topics that you'd like for us to cover, please go ahead and leave a comment below and we'll be sure to read and address them. Thank you all for watching.